children lost, ensnared by a witch's binding spell. Jessie, the awakened soul, yearns to escape and find a new home. Dare you join her and explore more?
Alright, so let's get into this video talking about the slit-mouthed woman. Now, I debated on whether I was going to even do this video because honestly it is really dark and I can't really show you a lot of the pictures of her because it's like too much for YouTube, you know what I mean? So for a lot of this you're gonna have to use your imagination, and I can probably show you some like drawings of her, but that's as far as it's gonna go. Obviously after this you can do your own research and look at the actual scary images of her face. Okay, so her backstory is actually very sad. Before she became this very creepy creature, she was just a regular woman. As the story goes, a beautiful woman named Kujisaki was married to a man who suspected her of being unfaithful. Now, the thing was, her husband was correct. She had actually fallen for another man and was planning on leaving her husband. So he flew into a jealous rage and took a huge pair of scissors and gave her a large permanent smile on her face. He then said,
"Who will think you're pretty now?"
But when he was done, he felt so bad about what he did that he died from the guilt. So now it is said that she hides in plain sight. And because looks are very important to her, she's actually able to disguise her disfigured face as a normal face. She appears as an attractive woman with long black hair wearing a simple beige trench coat. But more recently in this legend, it describes her as wearing a surgical mask over her face, which is actually not an uncommon accessory to wear in Japan. Even like before everything that's happened in the past year, like this was a common thing to wear for like decades. So thanks to her innocent appearance, the slit-mouthed woman is able to blend in until she selects her prey. Now, when she comes up to you, she's going to ask you a very serious question. She'll find you when you least expect her to be there, and like I said, she's going to have a surgical mask over her face. So at first she appears like a normal looking woman. She waits in the shadows until you pass her by, and before you can react, she is in front of you, blocking your path. Holding a huge pair of scissors in her hands, she asks you, "Am I pretty?" But before you can answer, she slides down her mask to reveal her terrifying huge smile. And as she grins, she says,
"Am I pretty now?"
So what would your answer be? Apparently, if you say yes or try to scream, she will make your face look exactly like hers. It also says that running is absolutely no use because she's scary fast, like unnaturally fast, that if you begin to run, she will appear in front of you and do the same thing. Now, if you say no to her question, apparently she will leave you alone for now. She will let you walk home, go into your house, and think everything will be okay. But later on, while you're sleeping, she will reappear to get you. So a lot of people are saying, well, how do you get away from her? Because if you say yes, you're in trouble, and if you say no, you're in trouble. Apparently, there is a way to outwit her. Some people claim that they know how to escape the slit-mouthed woman. They say that one way to survive is to distract her. When she asks you the question, "Am I pretty?" if you offer her money or candy, you will confuse her. And it says you might buy yourself just enough time to run. There is also another way to outwit her. So when she asks you, "Am I pretty?" instead of saying yes or no, it says you could respond by saying, "You're okay. You're kind of so-so." So you're kind of giving her a middle answer and she's not really sure what to do with that. Another thing you can say to her is flip the question and be like, "Am I pretty?" And as she pauses to consider if you're pretty, you have a chance to run away. So it's all about outwitting her, distracting her, and flipping her question back to her. Now, what's so creepy about the slit-mouthed woman is that people have been talking about her since the 1600s, which is insane. Apparently she was terrorizing people back then. So many people were afraid of her, and then suddenly she disappeared for hundreds of years and then came back in the 1970s. Children claimed to see her everywhere around Nagasaki, Japan. There were warnings everywhere, police were out trying to find her, but they never did. According to one urban legend, a young boy named John was walking home from school one day when the slit-mouthed woman appeared in front of him and asked her eternal question, "Do you think I am pretty?" Now, petrified, obviously, John tried to run away, but she ran after him, grabbed him, and bent his neck. John was a strong boy and didn't die right away. The police arrived and ferried him to the hospital. Now, everyone thought he was gonna survive, but apparently as he was lying in his hospital bed, all the doctors and police and nurses were asking him what happened. Suddenly his eyes opened wide and out of fear he croaked,
"The slit-mouthed woman."
and then he died right there. There was also another legend about a businessman who was walking home from a bar one night. He spotted this beautiful woman sitting alone wearing a surgical mask. They chatted for a while and then the woman told him that they should go somewhere private. She led him to an alleyway, and when he moved in for a kiss, she stopped to ask him a question. "Do you think I am beautiful?" He answered yes, and the woman slid down her mask to reveal her horrible wide smile. And then I'm sure you can imagine what happened to him next. Alright, so let's get into today's video talking about teke teke. So first, let's talk about what vengeful spirits are, because that is what teke teke is. Vengeful spirits have been a part of Japanese folklore for an incredibly long time, dating back as far as 8 AD. These are tales that are passed on from generation to generation, from parents to kids, and these spirits and stories often have a very important moral to them, usually meaning don't be mean or your soul will get eaten. Now, there are two different origin stories for teke teke. The first one actually dates back to before World War II, while the other one seems to come from around 1957 or so. The spirit herself is actually classified as a onryo. I'm saying that so wrong, I'm so sorry. Which is a ghost who only exists to rain down hatred upon those unfortunate to cross their path. These ghosts are often women who have been wronged, and after their death, their anger and passion left them tethered to this world on a never-ending quest to seek vengeance against those who forced them into the afterlife. So now that you know that she's a very vengeful spirit, let's talk about her two different origin stories. Just a PSA, these stories are quite disturbing, so if you don't like hearing about stuff like that, maybe this ain't the video for you. The first story allegedly occurred in post-war occupied Japan, where this woman was attacked by a soldier and was thrown onto the railway tracks. Then a passing train split her in two, separating her legs and her torso. Now, it was so cold outside when this happened that all of her wounds actually froze over and stopped her from bleeding, and that's what helped her to stay alive. Luckily, her screams actually alerted one of the railway attendants, and when he ran over to see what was going on, instead of going to help her, he was so shocked and disturbed by what he saw, I mean the state she was in just left him baffled, that he covered her with a plastic bag and just left her there to die. Now, this version of the legend was actually made into a horror movie in 2009, and apparently this is the version that most people are familiar with. Then we have story number 2. The second story is told of a young Japanese schoolgirl who was afraid of her own shadow. She was often ridiculed by fellow classmates for her lack of courage, and she was constantly the victim of their cruel jokes. But one day, one of these pranks turned fatal, and the legend of teke teke would be born. While waiting for a train one day after school, the girl's friends decided to have a little fun at her expense and dropped a cicada bug onto her shoulder. But what should have been a simple case of giving her a nasty fright turned deadly after she panicked at the sight of the creature and fell onto the tracks just as a Shinkansen train barreled through the station, splitting her in two. Now, whichever of these two stories of teke teke that you choose to believe, both end in a very sad and violent death that spawns this spirit who is bent on getting vengeance. Now, there is this creepy story of a teenager who met her. It was 10 p.m. and a teenager named Satoshi was heading home after cram school had kicked out. On his way, he looked up at an abandoned building he was passing and noticed a very beautiful young girl sat looking out of one of the windows at him. Their eyes locked and they exchanged smiles at each other before the girl asked him,
"Where are my legs?"
Confused and not understanding the question, question. Satoshi responded, I'm sorry, I don't know. The girl suddenly sprang from her perch, and it was then that Satoshi saw that she was only a torso. Shocked, stunned, and paralyzed by fear, Satoshi could not move as the girl crawled towards him. She was only using her arms and elbows, making a teki-teki sound as she got closer. And when she reached him, she split him in two. The sound she makes, however, that haunting noise that gives her name, is due to her using her overgrown fingernails to drag her torso towards whoever is now the subject of her rage. So then at the end of my research, I found a warning. According to this legend, 3 days after you hear this story, you will see the ghost of a woman who was only a torso. The ghost will try to catch you, and escape is impossible even in a car. The ghost can crawl at a speed of 150 kilometers per hour. Some say this ghost is just searching for her missing legs. Another version of the story suggests that the legend was designed to deter people from bullying or abusing or assaulting others. So the moral of the story is, be kind to others. And don't worry, she's not coming after you. I researched this story over a week ago, and I'm still here. 3 days have long gone by. I've never believed in that type of stuff with stories when it says like, you have 7 days to live. There's gonna be a girl on your ceiling tonight. I have read all of those stories. I've had all of those chain mails, and I'm still here. You're gonna be fine. Alright guys, so let's talk about this 8-foot woman. Now her full name is Hachisaku-sama. I hope I'm saying that right, I really did try. But she is also known as the Japanese Slender Man. Many people who have seen her say she looks just like him, which is horrifying. Now she's supposed to be a spirit who has taken the form of a very tall woman. But one of the most bizarre things is that she's said to have this deep, low, masculine voice. And she's constantly repeating the word po over and over again. But like I said, in a deep, low, rattly voice like po, 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 which is kind of scary. She apparently goes after children that are specifically between the ages of 9 and 11 years old. So if you're watching this video and you are in that age group, watch out. I'm just kidding. Please don't go and tell your parents that the 8-foot woman is coming for you. I want them to like me. Okay, so the first fact about her is that she is 244 centimeters tall, aka 8 feet tall. Imagine being a little kid looking outside your home when you see a 244 centimeter tall woman staring back at you through your bedroom window on the 2nd floor. I mean, 8 feet tall is rare to be. Like, not many people in the world have reached that height. The tallest person to ever live was a man named Robert Wadlow. People actually called him the Giant of Illinois. He was 8'11", guys. That's crazy. So he was just slightly taller than Hachisaku-sama. I also looked up how tall Slender Man is just to see how she compares, and he's apparently 15 feet tall. So I think he wins in the height department. It also just really gives me the creeps just thinking about seeing a woman's face in my bedroom window on the 2nd floor. That would destroy me. The second creepy fact about her is that she makes a terrifying sound when close, like I just mentioned. Her deep, manly, terrifying voice comes in threes. She says, po, 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 over and over again. This noise indicates to her victims that she's coming for them, and there's not much they can do about it. Hachisaku-sama takes her time with her victims. She is known to stalk them for weeks or even months before making a move. You could potentially hear this noise outside your window, at the playground, at your parents' home, or anywhere else that Hachisaku-sama wants to make her presence known. This part of it is actually kind of similar to Slender Man. People say he has the Slender Man effect, which only occurs when he's near somebody. And even though the Slender effect is much more violent as it causes victims to become disoriented and nauseated, these two creatures both give a warning when near. So I guess, I mean, at least they warn you. The next thing is that she preys upon children. Now, Slender Man has been said to prey upon children and adults, but apparently this 8-foot tall woman only chooses children most of the time. The reason for this is unknown, but it is believed that she only kidnaps young children because she feeds off their young essence, which may be why she looks like a young woman at times. Another creepy thing is that she can mimic your loved one. There's this story about a boy who came in contact with her. He ran and told his grandparents, and they were terrified because they had heard of her legend before. So they tried to take the proper steps to get their grandson away from this spirit, but she kept appearing outside of his bedroom door, outside of his window, and she would actually mimic the voice of his grandparents to try and get him to let her in. If the boy had done so, he would have been kidnapped by her and never seen again. Now the next day he told his grandparents that he heard their voices outside of his door and they said it wasn't them. They swore to him that it was not their voices, so the whole thing is just creepy. This is apparently a true story about this boy, so I really hope not. The next thing is that you are destined to die after seeing her. So most people know that Slender Man makes his presence known to you once you begin to look into his existence. Like a quick search on the internet and you can find yourself falling down a rabbit hole of images and videos that sear his presence into your mind. And this is how he chooses his victims and claims you for his fate. However, Hachisaku-sama picks her victims at random as long as they are children, like I said. Like if you're a child in Japan, you are fair game for her to come and get you. It says if she sets her sights on you, kiss your parents goodbye because she's going to come for you. And make sure to listen for her signature sound,
Po, po, po.
not the Teletubby. Not the Teletubby. Now you'll know it's her because she's wearing this long white dress, and it's really interesting how she's wearing formal clothing and so is Slender Man. It's like a formal clothing creature thing. She also has long black hair, so people say she kind of looks like the Grudge or like Samara from The Ring, and most of it actually blocks her face, so you can't really see what she looks like. She also wears a hat in many of her depictions, and apparently she looks very beautiful, and that's what entices people to go near her or follow her. Now apparently there is a way to get rid of her if she is following you. To put an end to her stalking, the victim has to sit in a secluded room where newspapers block the outside view from all windows. 4 bowls of salt are placed in each corner, and the victim must stay in the room for an entire night. They say that in the morning, the 4 bowls of salt should be turned black. And that's your indication that she was trying to get into the room that you were in, but the salt was like blocking her. So once the salt is black, you know that her stalking has been stopped, but it does say the victim must leave Japan and never return unless he or she is willing to fall victim to her persistent evil. So that's great to know. I mean, at least there's somewhat of a way to like get rid of her, but you have to like leave your entire life behind, which is never really fun. Alright guys, so let's get into today's video talking about Japanese urban legends. If I say any of these names incorrectly, I'm so sorry. I'm terrible at pronouncing things. Please forgive me. So first we have the Noh masks. Masks are an essential element of the centuries-old tradition of Noh theater, signifying to the audience many aspects of the wearer's character. While they obviously hide the actor's expressions, they're carefully carved to catch the stage light and change expression depending on the angle of the mask's shadow. Now, Noh masks are actually supposed to be supernatural in some way, and I mean, apart from the fact that a lot of them are really creepy looking, the mask can both represent a smiling face and a sad face, depending on which angle you look at it, like I said. When kept in the house, the masks are said to draw in negative energy from the owners till they get completely consumed by the mask itself and their soul trapped in a different dimension of pain. So there's literally warnings everywhere saying that only professionals should wear these masks because the evil energy residing inside of them causes the mask to create an evil entity of its own, and careless wearers will have their soul sucked from the body. So yeah, that's pretty spooky. Next we have Hitobashira, which means human pillar. Now there actually is some truth to this part. The human pillars in Japan are literally just that, pillars that have humans trapped inside of them. The popular myth was that pillars with humans trapped inside them would bless the construction of the building and hold it firm. But most places that are built with these human pillars are said to be haunted because the souls trapped inside them are not very happy about it. But apparently when I read more about this, it's not just about people inside pillars themselves. It's also when people are buried alive or near a construction site. So like large-scale buildings, dams, bridges, castles, rituals. So basically, whenever someone is buried alive when a building is being made, it's supposed to be a prayer to the gods so the building is not destroyed by natural disasters such as floods or by enemy attacks. Hitobashira could also refer to workers who were accidentally injured and buried during construction. Now, here are some real life examples of buildings that were made under these circumstances. First, we have Meruoka Castle. When this place was first being built, the stone wall of the castle kept collapsing no matter how many times it was piled up. So the builders decided that they should make someone a human sacrifice. They found this one-eyed woman. Her name was Oshizu, and she had 2 children. She lived a very poor life, but she was selected to be the Hitobashira. She agreed to do this on one condition, and that was that one of her children could be made a samurai. They agreed, and she was buried under the central pillar of the castle keep. But they did not keep their word, and her son was not made a samurai. So her spirit felt resentful and made the moat overflow with spring rain. People actually called it the rain caused by the tears of Oshizu's sorrow, and they erected a small tomb to soothe her spirit. And then we have Matsu Castle. According to legend, the Matsu Castle is also said to have been constructed on a human sacrifice that was buried under the castle's stone walls. Her name has never been recorded, and nothing concerning her is remembered except that she is thought to have been a beautiful young maiden who was fond of dancing and is referred to as the Maiden of Matsu. After the castle was built, a law was passed forbidding any girl to dance in the streets of Matsu because the hill would shudder and the castle would shake from top to bottom. So I had never heard of any of this in my entire life, and it's actually really sad but intriguing to hear about. Then we have Kune Kune. Kune Kune is a legend in which a distant apparition seen on rice or barley fields on hot summer days wiggles as if moved by a strong gust of wind even on windless days. Now, when people see this and they look more closely, you can see that it's squirming and bending from left to right. And apparently the movements are supposed to be really impressive, like crazy angles that the human body would not be able to make. It is claimed that anyone who tries to get a closer look at it is driven insane or dies when touching it. Now, there are several different reasons why people might see something like this if we're thinking like logically about it, such as the Japanese camps have scary scarecrows which end up generating other stories. Another possibility is dehydration and heat stroke that can result from the hottest days. But this is still a really eerie thing to hear about. And then lastly, we have a story called The Girl in the Gap. You know that small gap between your dresser and the wall, or between your bed and the floor? Apparently you should not look in there, because if you see a pair of eyes staring back at you, you're in trouble. I was so freaked out when I was reading this because there are gaps like everywhere in people's houses, dark corners that we see all the time and don't think much about. Japanese superstition holds that a spirit lives between the gaps of things like furniture and slightly open doors. And if you lock eyes with the girl in the gap, it will ask you to play hide and seek. But apparently while you're playing hide and seek, if you were to see the eyes in the gap one more time, she will grab you and take you down under to the scary place, if you know what I mean. So I was reading a lot of stories about people who have actually seen this girl in the gap, and I'm debating on making like a vlog video talking about all of those separate stories because they are so creepy. And honestly, after I did research for this video, I was like avoiding looking in like cracks in my dresser and like under my bed and like indoors. Like it affects me. This apparition is known as Rokurokubi. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. When do I ever say anything right? Also known as the long neck lady or the women with floating heads. Interesting, right? By the way, I don't think I've ever worn hoop earrings, literally ever. I cannot tell if they suit me or not, but I thought I'd try them today. I got them for my birthday and I like them, but I'm trying to decide if I like them on me. What do you guys think? Anyways, we're gonna just jump right into today's video. I know I do a lot of talking at the beginning of of my videos because I have just so much to tell you guys all the time, but we're just gonna dive in. We're diving. So like I said, Rokurokubi is a Japanese apparition, and they actually look almost completely human aside from a few differences during the day, and they typically present themselves as female when they are seen. So you could be walking through the streets, or you could have a friend or a relative that you literally have no idea is this creature behind the scenes. And then at night, their neck stretches and their head begins to wander and flies around freely. Sometimes their head is completely detached from the neck and it goes exploring as far as it pleases. Now, some people think that this was just a legend created to scare people into staying inside their houses after midnight. It encourages kids to come home at curfew. It stops people from wandering the streets all hours of the morning. So is it a legend or is it true? What's interesting is that some of these creatures are self-aware and they do know that they are creepy apparitions, but there are a few who still believe they are human. They remain unaware of what happens to their bodies at night and think they are just having nightmares about their necks and heads wandering off. It's like a creepy ghost that does not realize it's a creepy ghost. It's like the Sixth Sense all over again. But most of them know, and they do take advantage of that. They are known as pranksters. They love to frighten people. They love to cause trouble. They also like to scare small animals, which is horrible. They like to knock things over in your house. They also love knocking over oil lamps to drink the oil. They expose themselves when oil began disappearing from the home at a rapid rate. So if you have like a lot of oil lamps and stuff hanging around and suddenly they go missing, you better get out of your house fast. To keep their existence more secretive, Rokurokubi make a point to appear in front of drunk people who are usually too intoxicated to remember, and then the next day they can't give like a credible testimony to what they saw. There's this one story about a man who realized that his wife was one of these apparitions, and he tried to cure her by feeding her the liver of his dog. Now this actually did fix her. She became fully human again, but the thing was, she had already passed on her curse to her daughter. Well, the young girl became this creepy apparition the next evening, and the dog appeared as a ghost and bit the head off of the Rokurokubi, killing it instantly. So things just did not work out very well for this family at all. In an extremely creepy tale, an entire village of Rokurokubi is discovered, and every villager wears a scarf around their neck to hide their scars, even the children. So like literally it was found out that hundreds of people, well, they weren't people, they were these creatures, were living in a town trying to be unseen, covering their necks from people. Now there is another version of this creature. They're called the Nukakubi, and they're known for drinking human blood. They are said to be more violent than their long-necked cousins. The Nukakubi reportedly attack humans and drink their blood like vampires. Now sometimes their thirst for blood can be quenched by drinking from animals, and occasionally they just literally go up to their victims and bite them. Like they don't even have to always drink their blood. Now to kill a Nukakubi, one must move the body to a safe place where the head cannot find it. And this is for particularly the ones whose head completely detaches from the body. When it flies back to try and reattach itself, you're supposed to move the body somewhere that they cannot locate it. However, it's really difficult when a family member discovers that another one of their family members is actually this creepy apparition. It's obviously really hard to kill them. It is also said that if this creature's neck is still attached to their body and maybe it's just like gone for miles and miles, you can literally just take an axe and just chop it off if you want to destroy it, which is obviously horrible to think about. Now apparently living people can become Rokurokubi if they are cursed. According to the legend, the curse can happen for a multitude of different reasons. For example, a woman can become one after she is cursed for being unfaithful to her husband. And what's so messed up is that if a man commits a sin, he could actually transfer his curse onto a woman that he knows. So like if a husband does something wrong, he could be like, you know what, let's put the curse on my wife because she's a female. And then if a woman is cursed, she could actually pass it along to her daughter, like it goes through the bloodline. Here are some ways that you can identify a Rokurokubi. Since they look exactly like humans, and some even believe that they are too, identifying them can be quite difficult. But according to the legend, there are some ways that you can tell. Stretch marks along people's necks can appear during the day, so if you're looking at someone and they have like these horrible like red lines going up and down their neck that look like stretch marks, that is apparently one sign. And because of those stretch marks, marks, a lot of these apparitions like to wear turtlenecks and scarves around their neck to cover up these marks. So if you know someone who's constantly wearing a turtleneck, who constantly has a scarf on, that could be a sign. Others wear several layers of clothing to distract people from their strange necks. And some people, unfortunately, have literally watched a family member take a nap on the couch or something, and then suddenly their head like detaches from their body and floats around. That's like an obvious sign that you know. There was a story about this mother who was sleeping beside her daughter at night, and when she woke up, she saw the daughter's neck like winding off her body out of the bedroom, down the hallway, down into the kitchen. Like she literally had to get up and follow the trail of her daughter's neck. So that's super creepy. So the first Japanese urban legend is called Ohaguro Batari, and I know I'm not going to say these right, so please forgive me, but the translation for this name is nothing but blackened teeth. Late at night, a disturbing spirit dressed in beautiful wedding clothes can be seen loitering near temples and shrines. She basically calls single men over to her, and they're seldom able to resist her charms, until of course they get too close to her. From behind, an Ohaguro Batari looks like a beautiful woman wearing a kimono. Sometimes she'll even appear as a man's wife because they'll only see the back of her head. So she's concealing her face away from her viewers until they get super close. When the man comes to get a better look, he's surprised when she turns to reveal her face, which is an ugly, white, featureless dome slathered in thick makeup containing nothing but a huge, gaping mouth full of blackened teeth. And then as he's looking at her super shocked, she starts laughing at him, cackling in his face, sending the man running away in terror. They are essentially shape-shifting pranksters looking to have a laugh at the expense of an unwitting human. It has also been suggested that they are the ghosts of ugly women who were unable to marry. Now, eyewitness accounts are really hard to come by due to the embarrassment of the victims having fallen for this prank. So when this happens to men, they usually won't tell anyone because they feel silly for falling for the trick. But luckily, no deaths or injuries have been reported from this. It's literally just a prank that this spirit puts on people. I found a creepy story about a man that was working at a convenience store late at night, and as he was standing at the register, he began hearing this strange whimpering noise coming from somewhere in his store. He thought maybe it was a stray dog at first, but when he looked at his security cameras, he saw a woman hunched over in one of the aisles. Her shoulders were shaking just like she was crying, so of course he hurried over to try and find her. And before he got too close to her, he stood there, he asked her if she was alright, but she didn't answer him, she just kept whimpering. So eventually he slowly placed his hand on her shoulder, and she spun around to reveal a large smiling mouth with black teeth, and she had not been crying, she was actually laughing at him. She began to point at his horrified face while she cackled, and then she got up and ran out of the store. He called the police, but when he showed them the footage, it was blurry, it was pixelated, but they could distinctly make out a large black smudge on this woman's distorted face. And obviously the man knew that that was where her large black smile had been, but police did not believe the man, and they told him she was probably wearing a black face mask over her mouth. And yeah, that's how these stories always end, right? The victim is never believed. There's actually a similar urban legend. This one is called the Noporabo, and these don't have a smiling mouth, they just have a completely blank face. Noporabo resemble ordinary human beings in almost every way and blend in perfectly with human society. However, when you meet this thing, it could literally pull off its face. So they have no face at all, their heads are blank orbs with no eyes, nose, mouth, or features of any kind. These mysterious spirits are encountered on quiet, empty roads late at night when nobody else is around. And their main goal as well is to scare humans. And they do this remarkably well, obviously. Noporabo usually appear in the guise of a man or a woman with his or her back turned towards the observer. And then when approached, the spirit turns around and and reveals its terrifying true form. And to maximize the effect, they often appear with a face at first, and then they wipe their face off dramatically with their hand at the most opportune time. And they just revel in the terror that they cause to these people. And they'll often work together as a group to scare one individual. So as their victim runs away from the first Naparabo, he'll run into another person who he thinks is a regular, normal human being, and that person will be like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Are you okay? And once the victim starts to explain what he had just seen and what he had just went through, the stranger he's talking to will be like, oh, you mean like this? And they'll pull off their face. And it goes on and on like this. The poor victim will keep running, he'll run into another human and be like, oh my gosh, help me, I just saw this. And the stranger will be like, oh, you mean like this? And will pull off their face again. So it's all these spirits working together to continue scaring this one victim. Sometimes the victim will even get home and finally think he's safe. He'll go to his wife and be like, thank goodness I'm finally home. You won't believe what I went through. And his wife will turn to him and be like, oh, you mean like this? And will take off her face. So yeah, this, I almost think this one's scarier because it's kind of like never ending, like you can't escape them. But Alright guys, so without further ado, let's talk about the two-mouthed woman. The two-mouthed woman is a Japanese urban legend about a woman who is cursed with having two mouths. One normal mouth at the front and another hidden monstrous mouth in the back of her head beneath her hair. So this woman's skull literally splits apart, revealing lips, creepy teeth, a tongue, and although she appears to never eat, the mouth at the back of her head is constantly ravenous and is constantly consuming large amounts of food. They say that this big mouth almost has like a mind of its own, and it always speaks to this woman, mumbling spiteful and threatening things to her. The mouth will harass the woman and threaten her, demanding food always. It will screech obscenely and cause the woman tremendous pain until it is fed. This monstrous mouth can also control the woman's hair, making it snake out like tentacles, grabbing food and shoveling it down its throat. So they say that if you're a family that is experiencing your food suddenly going missing or lower in stock, while there are women in your house that don't appear to be eating, it is said that one of those women probably have a mouth on the back of their head and you don't know it. Because it is said that they appear like they're regular women until their secret is revealed. It is said that they are the result of curses brought out by wicked deeds. It's like a punishment put upon a greedy man or woman for wickedness. So let's talk about our first creepy story where this person experienced a two-mouthed woman, and this one is called The Missing Rice. So this tale is from Japanese folklore, and it's about an old man who lived all by himself in a small village. He never got married because he hated spending money, and he just always had this thought that if he ever took a wife, he would constantly have to pay for her food, and he just could not part with the idea of having to spend his wealth all the time, which is like such a weird way of looking at it. So it so happened that he came across this young woman one day who he noticed did not eat a thing. He never ever saw her consuming food. So he of course immediately asked her to marry him. And because she seemed to never eat and seemed to be a very hard worker, this man was just so thrilled that he had found the woman of his dreams. And at first the couple was very, very happy together. However, he began to wonder why his bags of rice were steadily decreasing. So one day this old man pretended to leave for work, but instead stayed behind to spy on his new wife. To his horror, he saw his wife's hair part on the back of her head, her skull split wide open, revealing a gaping, deformed mouth. Her hair reached out like tentacles, grasping handfuls of rice and shoveling it into the monstrous mouth. And when this woman noticed that her husband discovered her secret, she attacked him and tried to strangle him with her hair. But he did manage to get away and went and hid in the mountains. And weeks later, when he worked up the courage to return to his house, he found that the woman had gone through all of his bags of rice and every single ounce of food he ever owned owned was gone. And so the old man vowed to never marry again. And that's that first story. Okay, then we have a story called The Wicked Stepmother. In this story, there's a man whose wife unexpectedly died, leaving him with just one daughter to care for. Well, later on, he remarried, but his wife was really cruel and vindictive, and together they had another child together who was his daughter. However, they were apparently very poor and didn't have a lot of food to go around, so this new wife decided to keep her own daughter fed while she starved the other girl, her stepdaughter. So this poor man's daughter eventually died of starvation. And not long afterwards, the man was out in the garden chopping wood for the fire, and he accidentally swung his axe incorrectly and embedded it in the back of his new wife's head. There was a lot of blood, and he obviously expected this new wife to die from the injury, but instead she somehow miraculously survived, and the wound never properly healed. Instead, it formed into a huge drooling mouth complete with teeth and a tongue. This woman was in tremendous pain, and the only way to make it stop was to constantly feed it. It demanded more and more food every day to keep it satisfied, and eventually this mouth even began making noises and talking on its own. And one day, while the woman was asleep, the hideous mouth spoke to her husband and confessed, saying, "I am cursed because I killed your daughter by starving her to death." This is a very creepy urban legend for sure. Alright guys, without further ado, let's talk about the Spider Woman. According to a legend in Japan, when a Jorogumo spider turns 400 years old, it gains these magical powers and begins to eat humans instead of insects. This spider is said to look exactly like a golden orb weaver in real life, and these spiders are very large, with females of the species growing up to 2.5 centimeters in body length. And guys, that is not including their legs, so that is crazy. And they weave these webs that are large enough to reach between 2 tree trunks. And the spider's habitat is basically everywhere in Japan, and sometimes they get so big that they can catch and eat small birds. And because of their large size and the meaning of their name, these Joro spiders became associated with supernatural events. And I'm so sorry I had to show real spider pictures at the beginning of this video. I hate looking at it too, trust me. I just had to show you what the real spider looks like in comparison to the legend. But I too am arachnophobic, so I completely understand if you're freaked out too. So the name of this creature is said to also mean woman spider or entangling bride. It changes its appearance into a beautiful woman to ask a samurai to marry her, and then she will entrap him to eat. However, her reflection will show her true spider form, so she stays away from mirrors or reflective surfaces so she doesn't get found out. Sometimes she will take the form of a young woman holding a crying baby in need of help, and when a man walks up to assist her, she will hand them her baby, which turns out to be a giant egg sack filled with thousands of tiny baby spiders. And obviously those little spiders will attack the man. It is horrifying. Other times she will entice a man into a quiet shack and begin to play a biwa, which is a Japanese instrument. And while the victim was distracted by the sound of the instrument, she would bind him in spider silk threads in order to devour the unsuspecting person as her next meal. So basically, if she invites a man into her home, he is usually never seen again. And this creature can operate this way for years and years, even in the middle of a busy city. And the skeletons of hundreds of men are just building up into her home. There's like no furniture, it's just skeletons from floor to ceiling. What's really creepy is that this creature technically has 3 forms. She has her spider form, her complete human form, and then she has a mix of both. An upper body of a woman with legs of a spider protruding out from her back, and sometimes she has smaller fire-breathing spiders coming out from her legs. And yeah, it's quite a sight for sure. So I really wanted to talk about Jorin Falls because the Jorogumo is often associated with locations of water waterfalls. In particular, the Joran Falls of Izu have many legends about a spider woman who is the mistress of the waterfall. The original legend says that one day there was this man who was resting by the waterfall when he suddenly felt this sticky spiderweb clinging to his leg. So he pulled the spiderweb off of him and stuck it to a nearby tree stump. And the Jorogumo then quickly dragged the stump into the water. So if that was still attached to his leg, he would have been dragged into the water. After this event, the villagers avoided the falls. However, a woodcutter who was unaware of the story tried to cut trees in the area. He dropped his axe into the pool below the falls, and when he went to try and get his axe back, a woman appeared out of nowhere and gave it back to him. And she told him that he must not ever tell anybody what he saw. Well, unfortunately, he soon after forgot her words, and one day, after drinking too much, he spoke about his adventure and how he saw this woman by the falls. Well, after he fell asleep that night, his body was pulled outside of his house by this invisible string. And the next day, the villagers found his corpse floating in the water below the Joran Falls. There is a second version of this legend that talks about a woodcutter who actually fell in love with a woman who he met by the falls. He went to see her every day, but his body grew weaker with every single visit. And a priest of a local temple suspected that he was being enchanted by the Jorogumo, who people called the mistress of the falls. So on the man's next visit, the priest accompanied him, and when a spider's web wrapped around the woodcutter's leg, the priest let out this giant shout, and the thread suddenly vanished. So basically, the priest just saved this man's life. Well, despite knowing that the woman he loved was a Jorogumo, the woodcutter persisted, eventually wanting to marry her, but the people of his village refused to allow it, understandably. So the woodcutter ran to the Joran Falls, where he was entangled in spider silk and pulled beneath the water, gone forever. So because he still wanted to marry her and didn't listen to anyone around him, he eventually died by her hand, which is not surprising. So I don't know about you guys, but while I was doing research for this video, it really reminded me of the other mother from Coraline. Obviously, she is half woman, half spider creature on the bottom. So I really wonder if they were kind of inspired by this Japanese creature, because whenever I picture her, I picture the other mother, and obviously she is really creepy. Alright guys, so let's get right into today's video. This creature is called, and I'm gonna try not to butcher it, the Gashadokuro. So this is a creature from Japanese folklore, like I said, and it literally means starving skeleton. It is 15 times larger than a human being, and this monster has supernatural powers including invisibility and invincibility. The legend goes that it was formed from piles of bones belonging to people having died from famine or on the battlefield, and they are unable to move on to the afterlife because they died with such anger and pain in their hearts. And that energy remains long after the flesh has rotted from their bodies. And as their bodies decay, their anger ferments into a grudge against the living, which twists them into a supernatural force, which is this humongous skeletal monster. And it only comes alive if these dead have not been buried. It's in search of revenge and justice for these dishonored souls, and the spirit roams around the countryside after midnight. And when it moves, its teeth chatter loudly and its bones rattle, and apparently it makes the sound gachi gachi. That's how it's written down as the sound that it makes. But they are not always noisy. If they should happen upon a human out late on the roads, the Gashadokuro will silently creep up and catch their victims. Its goal is to cut off the heads of solitary travelers to drink their blood. And people become aware that it's nearby if they feel a buzzing sensation in their ears. The first time this creature was ever depicted in art or paintings was in 1844. This piece was called Takayasha, the Witch and the Skeleton Spectre. And because of the large amount of bodies that is required to make a single one of these creatures, these abominations are much rarer to be seen than they were in the past, because back in history there were so many wars and famines and mass amount of people who were dying at once. So now that you know a bit about this creature, I wanted to tell you a creepy tale of a girl who saw one, and this one is called The Red Lights. It is so creepy. This story is about a girl that recently moved into a new apartment with her dad and had a room with a window that overlooked overlooked a beautiful forest that had a park and a walking trail. She thought it was so cool that she lived in a city but still had a beautiful view of the trees outside. However, the first night that she went to bed, she noticed these red lights coming through her window. It just lit up the room with this eerie crimson color. And she just assumed they were the glow of the street lights or a nearby store sign, so she grabbed an eye mask and was just able to sleep with that on. She didn't really think too much of it. But the next night she grew curious about this red light and walked up to her window, looked outside, and she realized it was not coming from street lights or stores, but instead coming from far off in the distance, hovering above the trees. There were actually 2 circles of bright red light. She thought that maybe it was a radio tower or something, so she got back into bed and fell asleep. But her nights got stranger and stranger. She began to notice that each night the lights were in different places. Sometimes they were a little bit closer and larger, sometimes they were farther away and super tiny, but they were always above the trees. She thought it must have been a very tall structure, but why was it moving? Then one night, against her better judgment, she snuck out of her house to go investigate. She just really needed to know what the heck these lights were attached to. She walked for what felt like miles, and they were farther than she thought. And the closer she got, the higher up the lights got, until she was so deep in the forest that she couldn't see them anymore above the leaves. She came up to what looked to be a very old graveyard. The stones were cracked in half, there was graffiti all over them, and it looked like some of the graves had been dug up. She even thought she saw bones scattered around the dirt and tried not to pay close attention to those. And that's when she felt this immense buzzing in her ears. And she also heard this loud rattling sound somewhere in the forest. And as she looked around, this large gust of wind picked up, and the trees above her were literally parted in half. At first she thought that maybe this giant storm was coming, but when she looked up, she saw that a giant skeleton was peering down at her with 2 huge red eyes. And yeah, that's how this story ends. Could you imagine seeing this thing in real life? Like I said, when I first heard about Siren Head, just the immense proportion of that thing really freaked me out. So this is literally like a skeleton version of Siren Head, and I would just never ever want to meet this. There's a name for that fear where you're terrified of really large things. I don't remember what the name of it is though, but I have that.
In an enchanted realm, an oddity stirs, beckoning the curious. Meet Jessii, once ensnared, now awakened, waiting to be yours.